Hey guys, what's up? This is Alex Duque. Welcome back with another tutorial. Today we're talking about displacements. I just have a simple scene set up here. There's an object, a polyplane with some geometry. I made a distance just to explain something in a second, and I have a light. And I'm still a little bit doubtful about that light, but let's give it ray trace shadows. I'm going to soften up the shadows a little bit, and today we're talking about displacements. So I just have a font assigned onto a polyplane, and I changed the color of the background of my camera, but I'm kind of regretting that right now. It doesn't really look too pleasant. I'm just gonna turn it back to black, and this is what we're getting. This is just no displacements, no bump or anything like that. I don't know if you know anything about displacements, but displacements, what they do is that they actually displace a geometry. Now I have a 3D texture here and a 2D texture, and for a second I'm going to assign the 3D texture as a bump map onto this geometry, and that value is set to default, which is a lot, 1, so it's actually going to have a lot of bumpiness to it, and that gives you an idea of how this looks. Alright, that's a bump map. It gives you the idea of there being more geometry, but there actually isn't more geometry. Now granted, this is not the best angle in the world, so I'm just going to try and tumble here and make another render. It gives you an idea of what's going on there. So it gives you the idea that there's more geometry than there actually is, but there actually isn't that much geometry. The difference between that and the displacement is that the displacement will actually displace your object. I'm going to assign this back to the displacement, and this is kept at default values here, so I'm going to make another render. And you can see what's going on here. I know that the Brownian right now is a mixture between the Brownian and the settings of the actual geometry, but if you look, you'll see that the actual geometry is displacing. If I look at the alpha, you'll see what I mean. It is displacing up and down. So that's the main difference between bump mapping and displacement mapping, is that displacement mapping will actually displace your geometry. Now a little note about displacements. Usually when you connect a texture to a displacement, you want to middle mouse drag it into the material and then you go into displacement map. Thing is, that's actually not connecting to the material. Every material has a shading group, and that shading group is the one that connects the material information to the surface. So if you actually look at the shading group, you'll see that there's a surface material, volume material, and displacement material. And the displacement material in this case is that Brownian. Alright, so the displacement is not actually connected to the material, but it's actually connected to the shading group. So that's just something to keep in mind there, for any of you guys out there. Alright, so like I said, that's a default render that looks like that. I'm going to disconnect it for a second, and I'm going to make a head. I'm going to do a little setup, rather than having this, or it can be added but rather than, yeah, you know what? There is a node in Maya called a height field. That height field will allow you to preview how a displacement looks like. You'll find the height field under general utilities. Now in this case, because this is a polyplane, then it's not such a bad idea to use a height field. I'm just going to make sure that I assign that object for a second with its, just the object to the to a layer, and I have this 3D layer, which is the Brownian, in a separate layer, and I'm going to go ahead and make a height field. When you make a height field, a little plane pops up, and you can see that right now, because I haven't changed the scaling of my original object or anything, then they're both the same size. And with the displacement the height field, you can change the amount of resolution, the color of the height field itself, the amount of displacement, and the height scale. Now under the amount of displacement, that's where you want to connect your displacement shader. So if I just connect the Brownian to the displacement, then I'll be able to get a visual feedback of how this is displacement. And as you can see, there's not much going on here. The reason why, there's a couple of reasons, but one of them is that the resolution is not high enough, and the second one is because there's probably not enough displacement for us to see anything. Let's change the height fields. Let me try something for a second here. Just gonna make another texture, simple checker, which is a 2D texture, and assign that onto the displacement value. Alright, yeah, so don't ask me why, but the displacement apparently doesn't like 3D textures. Okay, so this is checker right there, assigned, which is a 2D texture, assigned onto the displacement value of the height field. Alright, now as you can see, there's a resolution value, so if I keep it at 10, there's not much resolution going on, so that I cannot preview. But if I increase that, then I get better resolution so that I can preview what's going on. And by default, right now, right there and then, you'll see what's happening. Some guys are going up and some guys are going down. Or, yeah. Now if I'm going to disconnect it for a second, this is where the height field is located. And once it's connected, this is how it displaces. Alright? Now, this is important because whatever's white, see that unit that I had 1? Whatever's white, whatever on those checkers is white, is going to displace 1 unit up. I'm going to change the settings of the checker so that it's just 2 and 2. Okay, 1 and 1. There we go. So it's a little bit clearer. So you can see is that, you know, whatever's black is displacing down, whatever's white is displacing up. Alright, so that's pretty straightforward. And the question here would be, well, why is it going all the way up there? White has a value of 1, and as far as the connections from a displacement, look what it says, out alpha to displacement. So and usually when it says that, it's a good idea to check the alpha is luminance value of your textures. Point of the story here is you got alpha gain and alpha offset. If I decrease the alpha gain to say 0.5, then the amount of displacing is going to be half of this, 0.5. And that's just meaning that whatever's white is now 0.5 units up. If I make it 0.1, then I'm just telling it that, you know, whatever's white is going to go 0.1 unit up. And if I wanted the black to go down from the actual original surface, then I can say that the alpha offset is negative 0.1, for example. So you can see how the whole thing goes down. Now, it's a good idea to always keep the alpha offset as half, negative half of the alpha gain. So if, let's say, my alpha gain was 0.5 and the alpha offset would be negative 0.25. So it keeps everything kind of like on the more standardized displacement amount. And then you can think of gray as no display, like 50% gray, as oh, not on the color gain, sorry, I'm going to change my color 1 to that. So if it's whatever's 50% gray won't displace, whatever's black will displace down, and whatever's white will displace up. So that's one way you can, you can see things. But if you don't like that idea, then you can keep your alpha gain at whatever value and the alpha offset at 0, and then all it's going to do is going to displace out from wherever the surface is. Right? So displacement height field, will allow you to preview and only preview how your displacement is going to look like. Because, if I make a render, see how it's black? Because this guy doesn't render. So I'm going to add him to a layer. I'm just going to show my layer 2. and I'm going to assign again this checker onto the displacement of the material. Now, the displacement actually connects not to the material itself, but to the shading group. So it's just something to keep in mind. And if I go ahead and make a render now, then you can see what's happening. This is displacing down, that's displacing up, and if there was no displacement, I'm going to keep this image, and if there's no displacement, then that's how it looks, and you can see how it's displacing 0.5 units up. Alright, so again, the reason why it's displacing 0.5 units up is because I changed the alpha gain. Because as far as the shader, the displacement itself, you don't have a lot of options there. Let me just connect it again to the displacement. So you'll see that the displacement shader, you can't really change anything on it. And if you look at the connection, you'll see that it says checker 1 out alpha to displacement. And again, it's just good practice to keep the alpha's luminance value on, especially when you bring external textures, because again, this is reading the alpha value. So if you tell it that the alpha is the luminance, then the alpha is going to be based on like a grayed out version of your texture. Alright, so that's, remember, height field allows you to preview your displacements. That would be the way that you connect them. Use middle mouse, drag and drop into the material displacement, or select the shading group and middle mouse, drag and drop the texture onto the displacement material, and then you will have a displaced geometry. Now, that also has to do with the actual surface itself. Let's try it. I don't know with this one if it's gonna work or not, but if it doesn't have enough geometry, the displacement tends to suck. But this is a simple displacement, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, it shows the same. You can see it's still a little bit of a difference in quality there, but it's a good idea to keep your geometry with a good amount of geometry itself, so that a displacement would actually show correctly. Now I'm keeping this on the simple version, but because this is based on real units, I'm actually gonna scale my plane here to, let's say, 100 units, and because it's so big, I'm just gonna delete this node now, and I'm gonna change the light from a point to a directional. And then if I wanted to, I can even show my height field and just scale it 100 units. And I'm just going to see how when I scale it, I'm just going to keep the Y to 1. That way it only scales left and right, or X and Y, but the up and down would be realistic as far as the amount of displacement that it would do. Because if I scale it to 100, then it's just multiplying the value, therefore it won't be a realistic render. Just so I make a point out of this. This is how the displacement looks like with a scale, or the height field looks like with a scale of 100. So you would say, oh, it's going to scale, it's going to displace that much. But once we actually make the render of the geometry, then you will see that there is only 1 unit of displacement. So that's why it's a good idea that your height field, in the case that you use one, just change this, keep the scale y at 1. Okay. Right now, whenever you use 2D textures, you are limited in the amount of resolution that you'll have. So if you ever make like a procedural terrain, for example, then what you want to use, and you want to do it via displacements, what you want to do is you want to make a 3D texture, and you can even layer those to get a particular effect. I'm going to go ahead and make a stucco, and I'm going to assign it to displacement, and I'm also going to assign it into the displacement of my height field. Oh, but the height field doesn't like 3D textures, so we're kind of screwed there. I wonder why. Interesting, huh? Oh, what we can do instead, I'm going to delete that height field since I'm going to use 3D textures. So what you can do instead is simply assign your stucco to the color of your object, and that way you can see, you know, what's going on. You can even, like, if you want to, high quality preview just to get an idea of how this is looking. And if we're gonna make a layered sort of 3D displacement, then we want to change some settings. So I'm just gonna change my scale, tell it to be really big, so you get like a main mountain, a second, and a third mountain like that. This is pretty much kept on default settings. And if you want to play more with it, you can totally do that. Scale everything to 50, and I'm just going to rotate this until I get something that gives me more or less what I want. And, you can spend hours playing here until you get what you want. But I'm getting something that raises up a lot, and I'm gonna get some resolution there. And maybe this can be like a river, for example. Let's try and change it up a little bit more. Scale it even more. There we go. And you can have whatever amount of resolution. Like if you make it really small, then you're gonna get a lot of mountains. Like that, I'm only gonna get like one big and another big mountain, which is kind of cool because then I can put my camera kind of like here. And I'm gonna make my light. I'm actually, you know what? I'm gonna make a physical sun in the sky so that I get like all the goodies of it. Well, the final gathering and the direction. Okay, so back to disconnecting the color. Now that I know how it looks like, I'm just going to disconnect the color. Oops. Disconnect the color from the stucco to the shader, so break connection there. And again, this is whatever's white is going to displace 1 unit. So there's not going to be a lot of displacement. And you know what? Since I did that, I'm going to change this to a Lambert. And I'm going to decrease the diffuse a little bit. And let's rotate our guy here a little bit more. Let's wait for that render to show up. Okay, so I don't know if you can see much, but there is some displacement going on, and I know it doesn't look like much because, again, like I said, this is displacing based on the alpha value, displacing X amount of units. So I'm just going to increase my alpha gain to a number. What number would that be? Well, the amount of displacement I want. I'm just going to go ahead and create a measure tool, distance, and I'm going to go from here to there, and I'm just going to select this guy, move it up here, and then just go straight up. So I don't know, I want my mountains to displace, like something like 20 units or something. So you can increase this alpha gain, increase it to 20 units there. And let's go ahead and render camera 1. Okay, see how it's displayed. So I'm just going to take this camera out a little bit. Go back here into the color for a second. Okay, so let's change this camera 1, put it where it's supposed to be, and let's go ahead and render it. You know, the way that we have set up, black is not going to displace and white is going to displace up. And I have the color and the displacement kind of like assigned together. And I'm using physical sun and sky, which is going to make me a little environment, and it's also going to give me a, you know, kind of like realistic exterior shading. And you can see out of the box what's happening here, which is that this is displacing upwards, and it does have some not so bad level of detail. And the reason being is because this is a 3D texture, and that's what's good about 3D textures. I'm going to make a render from the perspective view. Let's keep this image for a second and render from the perspective view. And that's, like I was saying, that's one of the good things about 3D textures, is that they can hold their quality. You know, they have like infinite quality, if you want to think of it like that, which is a great thing, because you can get really close to an object and get a lot of quality. Although you will have to increase the actual geometry if you want to have more detail. Once this renders finished, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, see how that looks? It doesn't look half bad. Now again, the thing is also mapped to the color, so if I break it from the color, it's going to be a little different. So I'm going to go back to this render here, and I'm just going to render this little area as it is. Render snapshot, camera 1. I'm just going to render that little area there. And you can see how it looks. Now, if you wanted better quality, you would have to do one or the other. Either increase the amount of detail that the 3D texture has, or you can increase the amount of texture, the amount of geometry. Oh, excuse me. It's 4 in the morning, so the amount of geometry that the geometry has. Let's start with the second one. Let's see what happens if I give this 100 by 100. So that'll be like a lot of geometry, right? I'm gonna keep this image for a second here, and I'm just gonna render that same area with 100 by 100 divisions on the geometry itself. Of course, that would make the render take longer, because there used to be only, I think, 10 by 10, 100. So there used to be only 100 total faces. Now there's 10,000 total faces, I think. 2, 3, 4. Yep, 10,000 total faces. So the render will take longer. But why don't I pause while the render goes ahead and thinks, and I'll come back when the render is done, and I'll actually render the whole thing so you can see. Okay, so welcome back. Now I increased the geometry of that geometry, and if you look at the comparison, you get an idea that there is some more detail. Like if you look at this ridge right there, you look at this ridge right here, this is with the high quality, and on the low quality one, it's more simplified form. However, this first render took 40 seconds, and this new one took 2 minutes to render. So you gotta be careful about how much you increase your geometry. There are ways though to improve the render, but I don't want to get into that. I'm going to keep it at 30 by 30, and I'm just going to keep that image and render this little area there, and hopefully it won't take too long to render. So you can see that there's a little bit, I'm going to erase this image, so you can see that there's a little bit more detail on that particular area that I rendered from what it was and what it is now. However, you can always increase the amount of geometry by changing settings on your actual texture. Now what I'm going to do here is on the channel 1, which is what makes things go up, I'm going to map a solid fractal. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me an extra level of detail. I'm going to map this into the color for a second. Do high quality so you can see what's going on there. Now I'm going to also put group to bounding box so you can see how the solid fractal is influencing the whites of that stucco. And here you got stuff like depth. I'm gonna make it 12 and 20, which is still pretty high. You have other stuff like frequency ratio and ripples, and it just takes playing with to keep it simple to get the effect that you want. So let's change these values. Let's say there. We got a little bit more detail there. Now the displacement, of course, is going to change, but it is also going to have a little bit more detail, hopefully. So I'm going to just pause this render, or pause this tutorial for a second while I make a render, and come back, because it will take a little bit of time. So yeah, and I'll come back. Actually, before I come back, just keep in mind I am keeping the color connected, okay, for a second. So we'll be right back with the render. Okay, bye. Hey guys, welcome back. Okay, so this is the render with that solid fractal assigned to the gain, to the color of the stucco, to channel 1. And point of the story here is that you can see how this was the old quality, like that. Let's just do all this stuff. And this is the new quality. So there's a lot more detail, a lot more peaks and stuff like that. It's more noisy. But again, as you go playing with this, you can change those values and get more or less quality. But that's the principle when it comes to displacements. Eventually you can make duplicates of the textures that you have, so that they themselves control stuff like color. I'm not gonna get into that because this is just about displacements. But that's pretty much what that is. Now I'm just gonna save this scene here for a second. Let's save this as displacements basis, and I'm just gonna show you an example of what you can do with displacements. Oh, actually, one thing I forgot to mention. Just gonna open this again. Is another thing you can do so that you're not constrained to rendering the displacement is it's actually pretty handy. If you go modify, convert, you can convert a displacement to polygons, and that conversion will be based on the amount of geometry you had. So if I had a lot of geometry there, I would end up getting a lot of geometry. Right now I do have a good amount of geometry, so this might take a little bit. Oh, there we go. So there you go. So you can see a version of how your geometry actually looks, and if you want to render this over your displacement version, that's totally doable, and you can even compare to know what is exactly what you want to do, if you want to do one or the other. I'm just gonna make a Lambert and assign it there for a second, and I'm just gonna assign the stucco to the color of this. Add that to a layer, and make sure I hide this one because otherwise it will render the displacement over the geometry. You can always soften the edges if you like, so I'm actually going to do that. I'll soften up my edges and make this one took 1 minute 11 and this one takes anyway 33 seconds. Although of course, you know, you can really see the difference in quality. But however, if you use it properly, then you can get better quality. So same as displacement spaces 1. I'm just gonna go ahead and just gonna import it into a new scene. And here's an example of something you can do with displacements and mixing other techniques instead of making your displacements procedural. You can have textures to show you the amount of displacement. I'm going to show you the geometry here so that you can see what I'm talking about. So it's a version of mountain hills, which is coming from DEMS, digital elevation models, or topographic maps. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with all this. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I have a render of this. I'm gonna give it a shot, but I don't think so. Nope, no render of this. But however, I do hope that you understood the basis of it, which is really what matters. Alright? So till next time, see ya. Bye bye.